Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 16th edition of the FreeFuse Sessions interviews. I am your host, founder and CEO of FreeFuse, and I am here today with Andrea MacKenzie. Andrea is a hiring strategist and team and leadership development expert who helps growth-oriented business owners and executives hire, develop, and lead their teams towards higher performance, lower stress, and stronger leadership. She brings her 20 plus years in corporate roles in consulting that spans almost every business function and size, from small businesses to Fortune 500s, to her unique approach to serving her clients. She enjoys working with clients who aim for growth and well-being for themselves and for those they hire, serve, and inspire. So without further ado, Andrea, if you want to go ahead and give us a little background about yourself that maybe doesn't include that, happy to have you share a little bit there.
Yes, thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate the introduction. Yeah, I mean, the bottom line, my business is called Lead with Harmony. And I'm going to reiterate a little of what you said, right? There's a bit of hiring in there, there's a bit of team development. And ultimately, the big thing that I advocate for is conscious leadership. And overall, that applies to everyone. It's not just the people who have authority and power. It's everyone taking responsibility and control over what they're doing every day, and being engaged and being happy every single day. And that we spend so much of our time in our jobs that if we leave that part of it out and say, well, I'm resigned there, it's just not gonna, basically reach out to the rest of your world and your life most of the time. So that's it.
Absolutely. And, I've always appreciated, the approach that you bring to how organizations run themselves, right? And, we've met through the context and the lens of, kind of HR and looking at how to work with folks to find like the best fits. And I think that this is something that drives like maybe any organization crazy, is how do you find those right people? So I know that you've had, a system that is really intriguing to me, the Kolbe Index. And I'm sure that you've talked about this many a time, but if you could give folks like a high level view of how this is actually a really, engaging and great way to understand who to hire next, I think that would be some great value for folks.
Yeah, so hiring is near and dear to my heart because it truly is one of the greatest opportunities for growth, for change in any business. And I think, first of all, let's be honest, and everybody knows this, there is no magic bullet to hiring the right person, right? It's just one of the deepest, widest, sort of evaluations you'll ever need to do. I think one of the things I see more often than you would probably think is that companies go out and look for people before they really understand what they need. And they need to fill seats. They've got stuff going on. They just need somebody, right? It's just, we need to get people in, right? And I think slowing down and making sure you're hiring from a place of clarity instead of desperation, fear, and all those kind of emotions is kind of one of the biggest keys. I think most of the time people think about what people need to know, what education they need to have had, what expertise, right? What experience, right? They worked for our competitor, or they're looking for something where you're trying to understand what they know and what they've experienced. And sometimes I think the hardest part is to get somebody who fits with your culture, which is a whole other literally a can of worms. But the one thing that Kolbe does that these other pieces don't do, right? We talk about the resume and the experience and the knowledge, or the cultural fit and the values and the personality of who's coming into your team. Kolbe doesn't do either of those. It doesn't assess either of those. What it assesses is a person's natural problem-solving strengths, their approach to solving anything that comes at them that they need to solve. So it happens at work, it happens at home, but when something hits you where it's like, I need to solve something, there's a natural approach that people take, and Kolbe pinpoints it very, very nicely and very objectively. And then what Kolbe can also do, which is amazing, is it can help, like I said at the very beginning, help people define what strengths and what approach they are going to expect of this person, so that they can then match up the people that are coming in the door. Because quite often what happens is you look at their resume and they go, yep, they know how to do this. You meet them and you're like, I love this person. They're great. They're fabulous. I love their personality. And then there's this missing link between, I'm really expecting somebody to be super, super detail oriented and risk averse and risk mitigation. And the person walks in, they're like, let's experiment. Let's do whatever. I'm this kind of, fly by the seat of my pants kind of person. I don't plan for things, and so there's this sort of third element that a lot of folks don't know about, or they don't know how to assess. And that's what Kolbe does. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally makes sense. And, I think that gathering that context, of course, about how, Kolbe looks at the way that we work with each other is like a really, really important element. And I think also it's a nice little segue for maybe the thought around, I look at Kolbe, as similarly to any technology, right? Like, to me, it is in and of itself, like, it's a tool, right? But it is a technology that we utilize to actually, gain insights about other folks, right? And so it's kind of, it's kind of like this, tool that we obviously incorporate into how, we can do things in order to do things a lot better, right? And I think that as we sort of look at what are some of the tools that help us understand each other better, there's a real thought process around how can we gather accurate insights, the things that are signal versus noise, right? And so, as somebody who's worked in this field for a very long time, how is it that we can parse out, things like, hey, I think that there's a certain behavior that someone has, or I think that this person who's a, prospective employee, they have maybe things that I'm picking up on. How do we sort of take away the noise and the distraction of maybe some of our own thoughts or some things that we're seeing on a resume to cut through and see if this person is actually who they say they are, and more importantly, will actually be who they say they are 90 to 120 to a year from now.
Aside from a lie detector test during the interview.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, there's no guarantees you're ever gonna, prevent anyone from telling you they know something or do something that they've never done before, right? That's part of the problem. That's why there is no magic bullet. Or somebody may be able to show up and act like they really want this job when in the end they're just, super desperate and just really just want a job. I mean, there's so many layers here. But I kind of want to rewind for a minute. Well, first of all, you used a great word there. You used the word behave, right? Which is the how, which is what you do, right? It's very specific when it comes to the assessment that Kolbe is. But I think it's also the part that's overlooked the most is we talk about what somebody knows and their personality, right? What they care about or how they interact with other people, how they communicate, right? And I think the truth of the matter is it all starts internally. So yes, Kolbe can give you some insights about other people, but what I think it can do even more is give you insights about who you are and how you work, right? As the leader, as the hiring manager. And I think a lot of times hiring managers, leadership in the context of business, right, don't look internally. What am I really expecting here, right? What do I do naturally with the least amount of stress, most productively, so that I can understand what are the things I really do need to delegate. How am I expecting other people to be where I'm not realizing that not everyone is like me, right? Like I mentioned that example of being super detail oriented. If you're a leader who is super detail oriented and you hire somebody who is not, the question is that what you always are going to expect of everyone else, or judge someone for not being that way? Or is it actually that you need somebody to help you whittle things down and become aware of where your strength gaps are? I think it's really the biggest use and the most important thing here is to not have somebody like me come in and be like, well, I need a hire. You tell me who's going to be good. It's like, let's talk about you, right? Let's talk about you and let's talk about your current team and what they're struggling and what they may be doing that's outside of their strength, so that you can then decide, like, what's the real role we need here? Who's the person that's going to come in and like take things off of people's plates they really shouldn't be doing? A lot of companies will create roles, job descriptions that already they're shooting themselves in the foot because there's all kinds of conflicting stuff in there. It's like the kitchen sink is thrown into the thing because that's all the stuff you need to get done. And you're not thinking, you're never going to find somebody to fit that role. So there's a lot here. It's not as simple as, again, there's no magic bullet, and it's still certainly not as simple as, well, let's just assess these people to find out how they're going to behave. You need to understand how you behave, how everybody else behaves, how you need somebody to come in and behave in order to match that against all your candidates and evaluate people. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it totally
Yeah.
did. And it's funny you mentioned that, because like I kind of had this like sort of realization as we were like first starting to like bring on new people, because we were bad at it, right? It's like every early stage sort of organization tries to like find out their best practices in hiring, and sometimes you hit it out of the park with certain folks. Like, I was happy that I got the core people right, like the people in the early days. I felt like I got those folks right. And then as we started bringing people who maybe weren't like necessarily incentivized by like, hey, you're like an actual owner of the company, even though we did offer like, stock packages and stuff like that, there was people who weren't as motivated about that. And what I found was, what you were talking about, I kind of sort of conceptualize and sort of label as like you're making new people pay for the sins of your bad hiring past, right? Because like you're more likely to say, okay, well, this person didn't do this, we need to find somebody who's like this. And it's like, that might not actually be the linchpin of what is a good person and what is a good employee that you think it did, right? And like every time you made a mistake, you're like, oh, we need someone who's more dedicated. It's like, how do you quantify that, right? Is more dedicated working like 12 hours a day? Sure, okay, whatever. But then what if the person who's working 8 hours a day is getting more done than the person who's working 12, right? And so there's kind of like this sense of every mistake that you make, especially for folks in like the early days, or like people who are like trying to figure things out, are telling themselves like, yeah, this is I need to fix this, this was a problem. And I think that that's the kind of mentality that people who are high achievers want to do. Like, they want to fix the mistakes so badly. And what ends up happening is they cause another mistake, because like you said, they cobblestone like a gigantic smorgasbord of, this is the perfect employee. And instead, like, this person probably doesn't exist. It's kind of like dating, right? Like when you try to put together like an ideal mate and stuff like that. And so, it's the challenge, right? So, you were talking about how we can kind of maybe sort of sort this out and maybe be better about this process. Of course, in the process of looking at something like Kolbe, that is one really important element. But I mean, do you have a maybe way that we can become more aware of ourselves, and become, just a little bit more aware of these things around us, maybe in a day-to-day, right? That we could see to ourselves, you know what, I am being quite unreasonable here, and I should do something about it. Do you have any suggestions for that?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I was like trying to take notes while you're talking, because there were so many little like pieces there. It's like, oh, yes, yes. So a couple of things you said, and I'm just going to try to like go over a few things. I mean, number one, I love working with entrepreneurs and businesses that are like in that high growth place. And one of the biggest things that happens there when you're an entrepreneur is you gotta make mistakes. Like, you have to be ready to make mistakes and willing to make mistakes. And when it comes to hiring, it's probably the place you're going to make the most mistakes, right? And I hate to say it, like, it's not funny, but it's funny. Like, I've spent time with entrepreneurs where they are so emotional over this. It's very hard when you think you got the right person and you're like, wait a minute, something shifted now, right? One of the things that's important is it's not like, you hire somebody and then it's like, okay, wash your hands of it, we're done. It's constantly checking in with people and developing people and making sure that they're getting what they need. The other thing I want to mention, and I'm not like accusing you of this or saying this is part, but it just came up as we were kind of talking here, is that one of the biggest mistakes that business owners make, and maybe partners or people that are at that kind of level of like, we're going to make this happen, is the people that work for you are rarely going to have that level of skin in the game, even if you offer incentives and pieces of the pie or whatever. I mean, that's a good way to try to make, to try to keep align that, right? I just see business owners quite often just expecting people to have that level of, commitment and what was the word that you used? Dedication, right? Where, you know, in some level, sometimes you have to let go of some of that, right? It's like these people have a life, they have other things they value, and you probably want people like that in your organization. So how do you support them to go out and do the things they want to do outside of work? Or, there's all kinds of ways to get people really happy in their roles, and when they're at work, they will be much more productive. The other thing that I wanted to say is, you at the very beginning of what you just said is, yeah, there will be mistakes, and as stuff goes, as time goes on, you might say, that role wasn't quite aligned with that person. And I think sometimes it gets really scary. Like the immediate gut reaction is, oh my God, I got to get rid of this person. Or, oh my God, right? Like you just kind of automatically assume like this is bad, wrong, everything needs to go. When in fact, you can look at it more holistically and say, what is all happening? What is everyone doing? And shift tasks around, right? We try to put people into buckets and silos and like functions and all these things, but sometimes it's just as simple as like, that person's not suited for this, and you just start shifting things around. And you really need to get to know your team. So that's the thing, right? And yes, Kolbe is part of that, but another piece of this that you mentioned is very emotional. It's that affective sort of, what's driving people, what's motivating people. And motivation can be a very, very personal thing. And it, again, drives hiring managers nuts. Like, why isn't this person motivated? You can't make assumptions about what motivates you is going to motivate them. Like, we know that, right? You got to know these people. You got to know what they're all about. Why are they coming to work every day? It's deep and wide and big, and helping people develop leadership at every level of an organization, understanding that they have the power, that they are, making these choices every single day for themselves is part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm gonna kind of like sort of give my own anecdote to this. So when you talk about like getting to know people, right, and trying to understand them to a degree, right, talking about motivation is so fascinating because, like, first of all, I think that there are some folks, a percentage of folks, who look at their work as an extension of themselves, right? There's a certain level of ownership to it, and like no matter what they do, they feel like it's a reflection on who they are, right? And I feel like maybe it's just that certain people, and I've looked at context as being such an important factor in this, right? Certain people in certain roles are going to be terrible. Certain people in certain roles are going to be amazing, right? And there's a certain, sort of feeling of pride that what you're doing is so tethered to who you are, because it feels like it's part of you, maybe part of a mission. And a lot of people kind of conceptualize that, I think, especially folks in tech and in the startup world, they have these aspirational messages like, this is the thing that's going to get people to really hop on the boat and really move forward, because they feel like they have this giant mission, right? But even folks that I've talked to who've worked at some of these places, it's not really that sometimes, right? Like sometimes it is just as simple as, I'm working here because I need security for my family, and this is exciting, and this is kind of that part of my life where I get to explore these sorts of things. And it's so hard to discern some of that, even when you ask, especially if you're someone in a position of power, right? I could go around asking people all day, hey, what is it that motivates you, right? And there's going to be a certain twinge of, there's things that I can't say. Like, even if you try to have a culture of openness and like, hey, you can say whatever you want to, which is what I try to maintain as best as possible, and I'm not going to pretend like we're all perfect at doing that. There's a certain twinge of like, I can't tell you that, right? Like, I literally might have this whole idea of, I'm literally here because I think in a year from now, I will have gotten the skills and I'm leaving, right? But I needed to tell you at the job interview that I'm going to be here for 4 years, that I'm ready for the long haul, that I'm, ready to build this up, right? And I'll even give a personal story, right? Like, even this is why we have a policy now of not hiring friends and family for a specific reason, right? And it's because the whole thing about knowing people, you think you know somebody until you work with them, and then you realize they're a very different person in that context than who as a person, right? So and it was very painful. That was very painful, and then it yielded some very bad outcomes. So I was naive in that way, but I learned from that very quickly. But I learned also that who you think in one context is not the same as who they are in another. So, as part of that whole conscious leadership, element, when people are really evaluating these things and, hopefully being aware of context and how people are, I guess like where they are and exploring that, how might we become more aware of how people fit in different contexts, right? And like, how can we become better and perhaps maybe take a step back and say, all right, like this person, I thought they had certain motivations or certain ways to doing this. They weren't great in this role, or stuff like that. How do we maybe move away from being quick to judge and understanding the context of each situation more consciously?
So many good, again, so which way do I go on this question? So let me start with expectations, because I would be, I guess what is always surprising to me is how little people really come to terms with what they're expecting in a role, in a person, right? It's a two-way street, right? So not only saying, what are you expecting of this other person? And not saying it, but literally like writing it down. What are you expecting of this person you're going to hire, this unicorn, right? What are you expecting? What are you expecting in terms of what they're going to hit the ground running with, what they know, with their ability to learn the things they don't know, with their values. So I want to talk about values in a little bit more of a deeper conversation, because that's really what it comes down to when it comes to motivation. And then how are you going to expect them to work, which comes down to this conative piece. Getting very clear on, this is what I'm expecting. And then here's what I think you can expect from me. I am this way, right? And I work this way, and I value these things. And I might have some gaps around what I know in these things, which is what I need you to fill in, right? We start talking about expectations at a very specific way at the early on, and continue to talk about expectations, whether they're met or not met, across the board, right? It's a agreement, right? Is what it comes down to. I see people start roles where like, well, we'll just figure it out as we go. You seem smart, or to your point, you're a great friend, you're a family member. Now, getting back to this idea of a family member, I've seen that work out terribly, like to what you're saying. I totally understand and recognize what you're saying. I think it does oftentimes, it's like a horrible way to go. I've also seen it work out amazingly. And the only way I can say that I would go about it is to treat that person like anyone else, in terms of, here are the expectations. When this starts to slide, we are no longer in agreement, right? So they're just like anybody else, evaluating their knowledge, their values, their way of working, just like any other candidate. And the one thing that is interesting about friends and family is, when we talk about motivation, and this is the part where it can go, usually goes one way or the other. Sometimes they are so motivated to help people that they will bend over backwards and cause stress for themselves to no end, because it's their mother's business or their brother's business or something, right? And they're doing all kinds of things they have no business even doing, because they're just so motivated to help, right? And then the other can happen where they're like, oh, I got this job, you know what I mean? Like, it really depends on the person. And I would say that whether they're a friend or a family, in a way, is kind of irrelevant. It's how you go about hiring somebody to know that you're saying these expectations. The minute they start to slide, you have some sort of way of keeping things on track, right? And then the other thing you said is, and I want to just touch on this a little bit, is that someone will be right for a role or not right for a role. And I oftentimes hear this, some people are like, oh, there's certain, Kolbe, profiles that are great for a sales position or a engineering position or something. And I really hate, well, I shouldn't use the word hate, but I dislike that way of looking at things, right? Because we can achieve almost anything with any MO, right? It's a matter of what is expected within, and when you use the word context, that's the right word, the context of all of it. Who else do you have doing what? Who's the direct person responsible for this person, so that you can, make sure that you're going to get what you're expecting, and back and forth, is the communication is going to be okay, So there's, again, I keep using the word layers. There's a lot of layers, and I think sometimes people think, the bigger the company, the more time they should spend on this. I totally disagree. I mean, I think when you're in a small business, every single person needs to pull weight, and they need to count, and you can't expect everybody to be, doing jobs that have the kitchen sink thrown in. They're going to burn out and walk away. And you're right. A lot of times the motivation is, I'm going to learn as much as I can here, or make as much money as I can here for the short term, and I'm going to be out. Happens all the time, particularly in fast growing tech companies. Yep.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think that it goes along with the idea of nuance, right? Like, I think a lot of folks, let's not generalize, but I think that there are sometimes this idea in our head that everything is black and white, right? You're good or you're bad, right? You're X or you're Y. You do this thing, you're good for this role, or you're not good, right? And the sort of binary nature is led by being data driven and having, being results oriented, right? Whatever I can parrot out of a leadership book and like a business building book, like, will obviously make it in there. And there's this idea that we can't evolve beyond, the sort of binary nature of how we look at things. Sometimes I think for certain folks, when I talk to them, it's like, I mean, I'm only acting this way because I need to get results out of this people. It makes sense for me to act in such a way, where I'm going to be able to get these particular outcomes, right? Because it's like, well, I could act a certain other way, but like at the end of the day, there's the uncertainty, right? The uncertainty that if I change how I operate, I will not yield the same result. The binary, sort of, the binary sort of like result, input, output, right? And so, I think that that's sometimes that attitude, I feel like, and I'm not going to say every time, but I think that there's sometimes where that attitude can lead to ruin, right? And I think, once again, it's a context dependent item as well. So are there ways for somebody to kind of maybe get, kind of like the canary in the coal mine kind of thing, like it's a leading indicator that tells me I'm doing something that in the future will yield ruin, right? Like I'm doing something that will have an issue in the future. How might someone become conscious of something like that?
Yeah, this is awesome. And actually, I said earlier, I wanted to talk about values more.
Yeah.
And this segues perfectly into that. So, I mean, there are two different buckets of motivation. There's fear-based motivation. Do this or else, right? Do this or you won't get that bonus. Do this or you're going to get fired, or you're not going to get the promotion, right? And that is unfortunately the primary way that people motivate people in corporate America. There's another way to do it, which is values-based motivation. When you were saying like people don't want to talk about what they're really doing and what's really motivating or what their agenda is behind the scenes, I think you'll find that people are more likely to talk about their values. And you can get a lot from understanding people's values. Like for me, my top values are freedom, fulfillment, and authenticity, right? So if I smell somebody doing the kind of stuff you're talking about where they're not being authentic, right? Like, oh, I think I need to act this way so that you guys will do this. Let me take you out for a beer, or whatever it is, right? I will be out, right? I'm out. I don't want to go have a beer with you, So I think people will, sometimes people aren't in touch with their values, but that's stuff that you can do with people too, right? And once you understand, oh, this person's really in it because they do want to learn some things. And who cares if they leave a year from now? Let's give them that. Let's build this relationship. They might leave and then they might know somebody else. They're going to be one of our, out there preaching to everybody how great we are, right? It's all part of it is employee branding, right? You want employer branding, I should say, to bring people in under a brand that is authentic. Now, I heard you when you said, people have put these grandiose missions out there trying to attract people. But if they're true and authentic to your business and who you are, right? And of course, it starts to shift and get diluted and change a little bit sometimes from, very small to larger businesses. But if people are in and it's aligned with their value system, they're like, oh yeah, at this company, it's going to be super innovative and fun. And, whatever that is, right? Or I'm going to get all this learning that I wouldn't get anywhere else, or I'm going to get a bonus because I value money, and security is a value, right? Sometimes security is a fear-based kind of thing too, right? So you got to be careful on that. It's one of those things I've talked to people about in terms of money mindset quite a bit. Are you valuing money and security because you're afraid of not having it? right? Or because you know what you want to do with it and it's exciting and you know where you want to go and what you want to grow. The other thing I wanted to just quickly touch on is, I talk about people being a great fit for a role. And it's come up quite a bit, especially in companies that are trying to hire fast and get a lot of people in, is that you can also, especially at an entry level, some people are there pretty much to explore and learn. And it's okay if they're not a 100% fit, if they are willing to learn and use that cognitive side, and if they're motivated because they see that there's a career progression, that there's like they graduate from this temporary place and there's all these places they could go, and you're going to help them based on their values, their desires, right? All of that, right? Again, this is leadership development from the very core. You're going to help them grow into who they want to be. What a great employer to work for, but you can't do it. And this guy's like, somebody told me in some book somewhere that I should do this, so I'm going to do it. That's not where it comes from. You have to care about people. So let's put that out there and yourself for that matter.
Absolutely. And, going back to the whole idea of like talking to people with missions, right? One of my favorite things to do is like, okay, there's LA Tech Week going on right now, right? And so, so you'll go to an event, you'll go to networking events, and my favorite, it's not my favorite because I think it's like an amazing question, but I think it's just so silly because it like removes the human aspect of it. But I mean, there's the people who, you go to a networking event for tech, and like people, one of the first questions out of their mouth is, what problem are you solving? And it's like, great, like, it's like, why can't we just have like a normal discourse about like what you're doing and why is it fun, right? Like, and so I always looked at that, and I was always like, hey, well, we're doing this, blah blah blah. And it's almost like it kind of like, in a sense, and I always felt like it kind of violated the whole like Simon Sinek thing, where it's like really starting with the why, because like the whole why part of it is in my opinion the more fun part of the conversation, right? Like, why are you doing this, and like, why is it important to you? Why do you feel like it's actually a useful thing? And it sort of colors the values, right? And it colors that mission statement that people have, right? And I would just say this, like, for folks who maybe aren't sure about like what mission statement they particularly have, I think it's perfectly fine, right? Like I think that it's more important to give the passion of why, because if you give like a mission statement where like somebody's going out there and parroting a bunch of stuff that you felt like was going to be good sounding, that's the lack of authenticity. That's the lack of having congruent values, right? And I've just seen that so much before. And what's funny about kind of how you're mentioning that is that sort of mentioning, the sort of security aspect of like, hey, I need a job, and ergo, like, I'm going to fall in line so I can feel secure in a sense, right? I feel like all of those things, like, all of those things sort of match up to the way we process information. And I've gotten really like fascinated with the whole idea of like the different parts of our brain, right? There's like the neocortex, the limbic system, and the paleocortex, which is like the lizard brain, right? And like security always like hits the hardest because you need to make sure you're secure, whether you call it Maslow's hierarchy of needs or everything of the sort, right? But if you think about it, the next level up is the limbic system. And I feel like the idea of values, while you can process them at the most refined part of our brain, which is like the neocortex, I feel like it's the actual like powerful emotional appeal of doing something that actually aligns, passions with what you're doing, right? Like it would make sense for somebody who loves video to work for Adobe, Adobe Premiere, right? Because they would be doing all the video editing stuff. It would make sense if you love cybersecurity, you might work at like a cybersecurity firm, or like maybe a 2FA authentication firm like Okta, right? Like those are things that align with like your particular passions and loves. And I think that sometimes it's almost pragmatic to find people who actually love the particular subject, and sometimes that can be part of why that mission statement aligns with their values and gets them in. And something really interesting as well, from the last conversation I had a few sessions ago, I was talking to this guy, Mark Anderson, who used to do interviews with the DOJ, right? And he was talking about how there's like little tells that people have about whether they're sincere about certain things, right? And so I think that if you're more aware of when you're in front of somebody and they have like, a certain kind of positive cue about what you're talking about, they're going to have things like, hey, they'll lean in, they'll try and listen further. Like, you'll know if they're actually interested in what you have to say, especially if you're trying to go out there and recruit some of these folks to be a part of your organization and be a part of that mission and know that they're aligned. So I think that all of that together, I think has to be almost a part of our experience. Are you really present and paying attention to folks? Are you delivering the right circumstances and situations for people to be the most successful? And then understanding that it's really not about necessarily getting the right person at a high top line level. It's really about equally as much their interplay with like all the other folks in your organization, which equally means that you have to know you and you have to know everybody else who works in it, right? So there's just so much fantastic, I think, information that we've actually been able to, sort of cover and build up together for hopefully folks to kind of like chew on, because there's just so many great nuggets here.
Yeah. And I mean, again, so much there in terms of what you just said. I love, it's one of those frustrating things for me too, when you're out networking and people they want to push you for like your elevator pitch or like something like this. And here's what's interesting to me, and I've said this many times, is, you have that pipeline of like ideal customers that you want to reach, and you have this pipeline of ideal employees that you want to reach and bring in, right? So it's like you're trying to attract. And there's two pieces to that, right? One is your brand, who you are, right? When you're talking about your why, what you stand for, no matter what, right? The promise of what they're going to get when they work with you, right? And that can be so compelling. So it's part of what's attracting them to you. But then there is that other side, which is what they're trying to get you, which is like, well, what do you do for me? Right? Because why is somebody going to hire you if you don't solve some sort of problem for them or enrich their lives in some way, right? So I get that there's like this part where it's like a problem that needs to be solved, or it's something that's going to enhance and make everything even better. Like you're not even aware that this is a gap or a problem. I'm just going to give you this amazing iPhone that you've never heard of before, because nobody knew what an iPhone was when it came out, right? And everybody wants one now, right? So this is all part of the marketing, the brand and the niche. Like, who am I? Who are you? And how do we have a conversation that's authentic? I mean, it's true for bringing in employees as well. So that is the magic thing, right? That you need to do to get the clients and the customers, and to get the employees that you really, really love and you really want to serve. And I think, one other thing I just want to say too is, I talk a lot about reducing stress, or having people be higher productivity, lower stress, right? And working together as a team, all of that. But you hit on something really important, which is when you're really passionate about something and you know what you want, stress is not necessarily bad, right? And this is something I've been studying neuroscience a lot too. So you and I are on the same page about how the brain works, right? We vilify stress, right? It's killing everyone and it's horrible, right? But when you think about the things you've accomplished that you really wanted, and the things you did to get it, and that kind of, basically that kind of stress stimulus that you put yourself under, right? That kind of thing. It wasn't a bad thing, right? The reason why stress is so bad is that most of us are doing a bunch of stuff we don't want to be doing, and it kills us. I think the bigger issue is we're not doing what we want and love, and we're not, getting into that purpose. We're not going towards the thing that our deepest desires in life. So yeah, you want to add stress on top of that, you're going to probably be in bad shape. So anyway, I'm not sure if that ties into what you were saying, but that's kind of the things that came up for me while you were talking.
Well, I think it does actually, right? Yeah. Because like there's a considerable amount of people, and there was like this funny thing. I mean, maybe it's not so funny for some folks, but it was kind of just said in a dramatic way, which always made me laugh. Which was like, a lot of folks happen to live lives of like quiet desperation, right? Because like they really want to. There's the tension of, I have X amount of expectations that exist on me, like, and maybe a lot of those are, kind of a manifestation of like more, sort of societal mores that we have, right? So for example, like, depending on what area you live in, you're going to have maybe some of your family pressuring you to have a family. A certain amount of your family who might be pressuring you to, get a high paying job, or, in certain cultures, it's about getting certain high paying jobs, right? Because those are better, like being a doctor versus being
based on certain shared value systems, by the way, right?
Exactly. Right. And so what ends up happening, you know, and I'm not going to name names about this person, but this person that I knew, they wanted to meet up to the expectations that their parents had. So they went and got a degree, went and got a job off of it, and there was just misery, right? And then they moved over to another job and or another role, got an MBA, and now they're doing fine. But it was like there was all that time that, number one, they wasted, but number two, it was just the idea that if that person hadn't kind of you know, sort of come to and decided they were going to take control of their lives and not like live in this world where other people could literally dictate everything that they would do, they would be sitting there miserable. And I have to imagine that there's some percentage of people out there that aren't really meeting up to what they value in life. And that's why they're not leading a fulfilling life to them. And that's like sort of leading to this idea of maybe like, you know, sort of misery, which contributes to bad mental health, which contributes to bad relationships with other folks. And you dive into things that are unsavory, whether it's drinking or, you know, other vices that folks have and stuff like that. And so to me, I feel like that's when we kind of, I think, look at everything from like sort of the idea of first principles and, you know, how we can become more of ourselves or fleshed out versions of ourselves who have strong values and what we care about and what we want to do. And we go out there and try and accomplish that. I think no matter what people think, that should really make you happy. Right. And at the end of the day, it really should be focused on doing that. And, you know, I just feel like there's a lot of folks who don't believe that they can accomplish it and they can't do it. And so they, you know, they keep themselves shut.
Yes, it's a belief system, right? It's
Right.
a belief system. And what you touched on there is one of the biggest pitfalls is confusing what other people desire with what you desire, right?
Right.
You want to please your parents, right? So you desire what they desire for you, but instead of really being honest with yourself about what you actually desire, what you actually want, that's secondary. Same thing sometimes with kids. I want what my kid wants. I want to make sure my kid has, right? Well,
Yeah.
but what do you want? What do you want to make sure? You're not going to be here forever, right? Let's be clear, right? And as you get older and you hit middle age, which is where I am, right? You're all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, you know. And it's scary. It's scary to come to terms sometimes with what it is you really want and you haven't actually had come to fruition yet. And to play with that, this is the consciousness piece, right? Like to play with it and come to terms with it, maybe sit in a little bit of disappointment or whatever these things are to see where the opportunities lie for desires to come to fruition going forward. It's never too late, right? And I think a lot of people get resigned to your point about quiet desperation. It's just resigned. Like, this is it. This is the best it's going to get. I tried that once. It didn't happen. So it'll never happen again, right? Like we're prediction machines, just like computers, right?
Yep.
Talk about all the AI stuff, right? It's like, we're prediction machines. We keep taking from the past to predict what's going to happen in the future. We're just going to keep repeating the past, right? So we need to see that things are possible. Belief systems, faith, dare I use that word in a conversation about business, right, is so important. What do you believe? What do you believe? What in expectations? You know, some people will be like, I don't have any expectations, so therefore I'm safe. It's like, expect more. Expect it to come or it never will. Right? You're keeping yourself safe. Your subconscious, that lizard brain is trying to keep you safe and tell you it's never going to happen. Don't try because there's risk there. And that's going to keep you from living your life.
Exactly. So, right. It's like living in the,
we're saying the same thing.
Yeah. Living in the visage of safety. I mean, there's like probably an entire conversation that we can have about AI, or like an entire conversation we can have about literally just belief system, right? Like, because that is like a sort of passion button for myself as well. And, you know, I feel very blessed that my folks have always like been supportive in the things that I wanted to do, and, you know, have always just, you know, given me the idea that I could accomplish anything that I, you know, could be able to accomplish. Right. So
what a gift. What a gift, Mike, that you had that. I mean, so many people don't have that. And that's the beginning of it. Like, I hate to blame everything on parents, but I mean, our parents, those voices stay with you forever, and you're constantly trying to undo. And if you had something that you don't need to undo, good on you, right?
Yeah,
Thank you, Mike's parents, wherever you are. Right?
Yeah.
And to my parents too, right? They were lovely people. So, yeah.
Well, And I mean, I feel like we could go on and talk about this stuff forever, but I think we'll just keep it for now to this specific show here, just because we are running a little bit to time. So I did want to offer the opportunity, of course, as I do all guests on the show, to be able to, just talk about a little bit of the work that you're doing, share a little bit with the, folks who are tuning in, and then see, what sort of things you would like to promote, or anything that you're working on right now that people should take a look at.
Absolutely. I mean, like I said, Lead with Harmony is the name of my business. If you're looking to hire, you're looking to help people, get better aligned in their roles. If you're looking to develop leadership and understand how you can work better as a leader yourself or with a leadership team, right? I love working with executive teams to help them become more aware of each other. No matter how great it is, it can always be improved. Those are the kinds of things I really love doing. And you can find me at leadwithharmony.com. There is, if you're hiring, there's a checklist that pops up, a hiring checklist that's kind of a neat little summary of some of the things that I do. And then there's also a tab for podcasts. So shows like this, where I'm talking about all kinds of stuff about the hiring pipeline and Kolbe and all kinds of things are up there. So there's lots of content to check out if you're interested.
Wonderful. And of course, in the post that we'll put up, we will have all of those links. So, anybody can go ahead and take a look at those. And we covered a grand, smorgasbord of topics, which is always fun. So, of course, we'll have this up shortly for all the folks, obviously who want to be able to interface with you. So, but in any case, really appreciate your time. This has been a fantastic opportunity to dive into all these things. Definitely a very, conversation that had so many different layers and dimensions to it. So I just want to thank you once again for coming on the show. And for those at home, thank you so much for tuning in once again. We really appreciate your time, and we will see you next time we have our next FreeFuse Sessions interview. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.